Welcome to the Josh Calloway Podcast.
The phrase fake news has been coined over the last several years, pointing out the fact that most of the mainstream media is biased and only puts out part of the story that they want you to know. The problem is that many times people take what they hear on the news for face value as if it's 100% the truth. What we will be discussing today has been reported by the media, and to be honest, it is confusing. I'm not sure that I can even figure it out. But with that being said, I want to welcome each person to the Josh Calloway Podcast. We have an exciting show for you today. I've got my good friend, Mr. Aaron Wells, that is with us. And also I've got Mr. David Walls, who is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Family Foundation. So I appreciate each of you guys for joining us today. Aaron, how's your day been?
I'm rolling in late, so, that's
Absolutely.
how it goes. At least Mr. Walls is the super expert today, and I'm third in line, so I don't have to say much. That's going to be great.
No, I appreciate you, David, joining us today, and had a little bit of trouble getting started here, but taking your time. I know you're extremely busy, and so we appreciate you taking your time to join us and have these discussions with us. I think it's important that we keep people informed, and that has been the whole reason why I've tried to do this and get this podcast going, is to be able to inform people about the truth and make sure that the truth prevails. And I know that it will, and I know that God will ensure that it does in the end, but we're definitely combating an attack,
Yes.
no doubt, from every side, it seems like sometimes.
Commissioned to defend the faith, commissioned to do what we can, the church being the pillar and the ground of the truth, as we said before. If nobody else can get the truth out, then the church is equipped to do that, and that's ingrained in who we are, as members of a local church, is to defend the truth no matter what.
Yes, sir. David, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do there at the Family Foundation and what your organization is about? I know some people across the state are familiar with it, but maybe give us a little bit insight about what the Family Foundation actually does.
Yeah, Josh, Aaron, good to be with y'all. And I appreciate that you're getting this podcast up and going and just going a little deeper into some of these issues and your perspective as a legislator engaged in the battle. It's just important. So excited to be here with y'all on this beautiful Kentucky day. The Family Foundation is we have been around since actually the early 90s, since 1990. We're a Christian education and public policy organization. We seek to promote Kentucky families and the biblical values that keep them strong. And I had the profound honor to take over as executive director just about 2 years ago from our founder and former executive director Ken Ostrander. But we're a Kentucky-based Christian public policy organization. Like I said, we work across the state. We do church outreach, encouraging the church to be the salt and light that we've all been called to be. But a big part of our work is also engaging in Frankfort at the Capitol when the legislative session is underway, and advocating for public policy that honors the Lord and is to the benefit of all Kentuckians. And blessed to be a part of this work, to lead this organization and our team. And then also we're blessed to be a part of a network of family policy councils. We're all independent state-based organizations, but we've got a brother and sisterhood of organizations in about 40 other states that are working from a similar Christian worldview, working on similar issues. And really this ties in, I think, to the discussion we're going to have today related to some of the specifics on some of the important work that got done this session, specifically related to SB 150, but really this effort we're seeing across the nation now, recognizing that we are in just unbelievable times where we're seeing really our kids, the hearts and minds of our kids being targeted in so many ways. And thankfully, here in Kentucky, we took a big step forward, and as a number of other states have, saying we're going to protect our kids in the context of their education, what they're learning in school, and certainly in the context of these horrific so-called medical interventions that are irreparably harming our kids in the name of a radical ideology that's just simply not possible, changing someone's biological sex. But let me just also say, we've got a number of great legislators that really went to bat for some core issues this session, up and down. But I just want to take an opportunity, since I'm on your program, to just say thank you on behalf of our supporters and so many folks across Kentucky for the stand that you took this session. Josh, you were bold, you were outspoken, and you provided a lot of courage, I think, that played a significant role, in addition to authoring a lot of important pieces of legislation. But just your bold stand and Christian witness, I think, was contagious. And we look forward to continuing to work with you on some important issues as we move forward.
I appreciate that. I was actually going to bring up the same fact that you all's bold stand on these issues and actually helping on the front end and crafting policy and the legality of it, those types of things, with the resources that you all have played a key role in all the conversations. I know many times late at night they're meeting with legislators and talking about things, and there was definitely a concerted effort by a lot of people to see that we got something meaningful across the finish line in regard to protecting our children. And so that is important. The second thing I wanted to say is it kind of plays into what you were just talking about. We did start up this podcast. You talked about targeting our children and what's going on in our society. And Aaron and I did a show a few days ago about Target that's targeting our children, and for whatever reason, it seems like that YouTube is determined that that's hate speech to say that boys are boys, girls are girls, and that Target was after our kids, and and we cited some things in regard to mental health issues, and YouTube has decided that that is hate speech. So I invite everybody to come to Rumble as well, because we are over there, and we'll continue to move forward. And I have definitely went back at YouTube in regard to that and push back, and they're going to cave. That's just what they do. They're bent in that direction. But now there's plenty of hate speech they do protect, actual hate speech out there. But if you speak the truth, it's evident that they don't like it. So I wanted to point that out. So Senate Bill 150, we passed Senate Bill 150 that did a number of things that were important to the protection of children. And I've talked a little bit on the show about how it came about, so I'm not going to go back through all of that. But really, it was miraculous. I think you would agree with me with what we've seen happening in the Senate, on the Senate side, and with House Bill 470 and the gender transition bill. And then where we ended up with Senate Bill 150, God definitely moved in a miraculous way, really over the course of about 24 hours, that we saw things come together and God do what only He could do. And so we passed that bill as we expected. The governor did veto that bill, and we got to come back and override it, which made for a very interesting day in Frankfort when we saw about 19 people, I believe, got arrested in the gallery on that day. A lot of things happened, but we were able to get the good policy passed. Now we're in a position to where that bill has actually been sued, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on and talk about how the ACLU has sued the legislature in regard to this bill, and not just the suit in and of itself, but the confusion trying to read through what they have actually printed in this lawsuit, and then some of the news articles that have came out. It is very hard to even discern exactly who and what they are talking about many times throughout this suit. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the suit and some of the things that you've seen as you have been pouring yourself into it.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is, and not to recap everything that happened during the legislative session that led to SB 150 being passed. As you said, there truly was a work of the Lord, and along with some dedicated legislators and others that were just willing to push and push and push on getting some important things across the finish line. But you remember, the ACLU now has come in, and we knew this was coming. They had kind of preemptively said they were going to, challenge this. Right. And of course, Kentucky's not the only state, as I mentioned. I think we were actually up to, with Texas. Texas may have been, depending on when Governor Abbott in Texas signs their bill, might be the 20th state, I believe, that's passed some version of protection banning these so-called gender transition interventions. But we're seeing these challenges play out. But what's interesting, and I think is of note in terms of some of the debate that played out during the legislative session, was the ACLU has specifically filed suit against the provisions related to protecting kids from these harmful gender transitions, and specifically the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones. They actually did not challenge the ban on surgeries. And why is that interesting? Because if you remember, some of the debate that happened was there was a push in the Senate to just ban the surgeries and to allow the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones. And this is really important for folks to understand, is these are all extremely harmful, produce irreparable harm in children. And once you start down this path, you have set in motion irreparable harm on the child. And in fact, the puberty blockers, really even before that, you have the whole social transitioning side of this. But once you start down the path of puberty blockers, you have already bought full sell into the ideology and the agenda of the other side. And that's why it was important that we hold the line and get the full protections that, was effectively in Representative Decker's original bill, which was House Bill 470. But it just shows you the fact that the ACLU recognizes that too, because that's what they're specifically challenging is those provisions in law. And so I think, one of the things we try to do as we educate folks on this as we move forward is just to remind folks that we cannot buy into any of the premises of the other side. Once you begin buying in even to the idea that a child should be on puberty blockers, I mean, what are you actually saying? You're saying that you think that a child's puberty should be open to be experimented with and pushed back because you believe that a child should, I guess, have more time to be able to determine for themselves what their biological sex is. I mean, when you start talking this through, the reality of it just immediately starts to break down, particularly of Christians who need to be thinking through these issues biblically and understanding that, puberty is what God created a process to grow young girls and boys into the men and women that God have created them to be. And who are we to say that we should be experimenting with that? So I think that's an interesting point to just point out first. But, deeper than that, in terms of the ACLU's challenge, you talked, Josh, about the confusion of this issue just at the beginning. The very beginning of this complaint that was filed by the ACLU, they have filed this complaint on the behalf of several families and kids here in Kentucky that are already being, I would argue, preyed upon and pushed down this path and having these harmful interventions done to them. So what becomes immediately apparent is the need for this legislation is apparent by the complaint that is filed against this, because we need to protect these kids. But another thing that's just obvious from the get-go, or not obvious from the get-go, is when they're describing some of the Jane Doe situations and families behind this complaint, you see terms like sons and daughters being referred to, but you don't realize till later in the complaint that the sons that are being talked about are daughters, and the daughters that are being talked about are sons.
Right.
So this causes confusion just from the get-go, and then not even to mention the fact that we're talking about how does a judge adjudicate the law when basic terms like son and daughter, male and female, father and mother in these contexts can mean the exact opposite of what they actually are. It just
That's right.
really, from a legal standpoint, shows that we're not just talking about harms to children. We're ultimately talking about utter chaos in terms of our ability to communicate
reality.
with one another. Absolutely.
All reality's forsaken. Whenever we start down this path, I asked somebody today, I said, I wonder at what point will they be trying to put into our English teaching in schools all of these new pronouns. I mean, it's got so confusing. And when you look at it from a biblical perspective, that is one thing that God says when he lays out what is natural and what is normal. And when people do not follow that, it says this is confusion. That's what God said. And so it becomes very confusing. And I dare say that we're going to have legal issues when we get into some of these situations. We've already seen it in Louisville over the weekend where a person was killed by another man, but they identified as a woman, and the news report actually reported that it was a female that killed a male. That wasn't even what actually happened, but that is what this report or this lawsuit looks like. And I agree with you. I was also very confused just trying to decipher who was who in the midst of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing again is we're talking about young kids. I mean, some of the examples that are spelled out in this complaint are, we're talking about 9 and 10-year-old boys and girls. We're talking about, and again, not to get too graphic, but these are the details that are shared here, talking about some of these situations, referring to the confusion of a boy saying that believed that there was that he was mismatched from very, very young ages, and talking about language about talking about boys being confused because they started menstruating. You just have to stop right there and say, what are we talking about here? How are we this far off base from reality when we can't even properly identify the biological realities of the kids that we're talking about here? And this is why,
Sorry, even in this preliminary statement, which lines up with what you're saying here, then they have a statement here in, I think, number 4 of the preliminary. They say untreated gender dysphoria is associated with severe psychological and emotional harm, including anxiety, depression, and suicidality. But treated gender dysphoria is, according to these treatment guidelines, is associated with severe psychological and emotional harm, including anxiety, depression, and suicidality. And they even back it up with their statistics later on that I think 86% of people who identify as transgender have have experienced suicidality. And their answer to this is not to try to make sure there are fewer people who suffer from gender dysphoria, which again they are saying in their complaint is the basis of the necessity for this type of treatment. They are saying that not only is the gender dysphoria the base of it, but also that the treatment for it is to expose everybody to gender dysphoria. Again, we're talking about not necessarily in this complaint, but as a whole. Mm-hmm. They're trying to legalize all of these things that are laid out later on that will literally, kind of introduce all of the young people to a flood of gender dysphoria. Is basically what they're doing.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's literally, I've got a copy here of the complaint, and then the what was filed last week was a request essentially for a temporary injunction to try to get a federal judge to stop the law from ever going into effect when it's scheduled to go into effect. And I literally just have it highlighted here with all these comments of whether it be just complete, scientific inaccuracies. Yeah. Quoting these studies that we know are junk science and are not based in reality, are contradicted in many ways. by what we're seeing over in the UK and in Europe, where they're turning away from these treatments, so-called treatments. And then even the arguments that are being made, the legal arguments that are being made. So the ACLU is arguing essentially a parental rights argument, which you can kind of understand at a base level. And obviously, we're all huge advocates of parental rights and so much.
Right.
Some of the other parts, provisions of SB 150, and some of the other provisions that didn't get across the finish line that Josh, you were working on, and others, about protecting parental rights in the context of the public school and giving parents the ability to have a say in the content that their kids are being taught and so forth. Obviously, we believe parental rights are fundamentally important.
Right.
But what's going on here is essentially trying to redefine parental right to mean something that it's never meant before. We have never advocated or believed that you have a right to sign off on the bodily harm of your child.
Right. Abuse.
This is where abuse. Yes, this is where we've got to get back to, the common law understanding, the foundational things. We recognize that all of us under the law, but children certainly have a right to not have their body harmed. And even if it's your parent, which is a tragic situation, but even if it's your parent who's the one that's saying, I'm going to sign off on some, medical provider to do harm to my child, the child's right to not be harmed is what needs to be protected. And that's well established in a number of laws that we have here in Kentucky and elsewhere. And so really, it's very, very dangerous what the ACLU, what's being argued in these cases. And, ultimately what's being argued is ripping apart even further what it means to be a person under the law, because they're essentially setting up this false dichotomy that says everyone is essentially not transgender or transgender. And what it means to be male or female, how we have, for all of human history, understood the concept of being a person, and that's all being ripped apart.
Yes.
And what we're left with is just utter confusion and chaos in terms of law, in terms of the damage that's being done to these kids, and ultimately in terms of the society where parents and young people are being introduced into these ideologies that are harming the hearts and minds of young people particularly.
Right. And there are times that we talk about things on here in regard to these issues, and you can't help but chuckle and laugh about the hypocrisy and the stupidity of some of it.
Right.
But if people wonder why that we get so passionate and so a biblical term, righteously indignant over these issues, is because we're dealing with children. You had the Herald Leader put an article out, and they were discussing what was going on with this lawsuit. And they tried to take these children and talk about their physical characteristics, about their beautiful smile and their pretty hair and their cute dimples. We don't need people like that to humanize children for us. We're not dehumanizing these children. Yeah. Where I'm upset deals with exactly what you were just talking about, is the fact that somehow that parents think that they have the right to abuse their child. Yeah. And I have fought hard for parental rights. David, that we looked at that this session. We're going back there again next session. I have every intention of it to go deeper and further into that issue. But those children are made by God. They're created by God. We have no disdain for a child that's dealing with these issues, but have all of the disdain for groups of people out there that prey on children with these types of issues. And in my mind, they are the enemy. Yeah. And I've tried to make it clear that we are going to push back with every fiber of our being to ensure that children's minds, hearts, and bodies are protected. And that's why this lawsuit, like you said, it brings so much confusion, but it opens the door for so many other things. And as Aaron was saying a little bit ago, it opens wide the floodgate for all children to be exposed to this. I think one of the instances in the article was talking about a child who was telling their sibling, who was a young teenager, about the feelings they were having, and that sibling said, "Oh, there's a word for that," and said it's called transgender, and then took them to social media and said, "Here's some people you can follow that have this same condition." And the media was applauding that as if that was supportive.
They've done a great job, yeah.
And, my parents, they evidently, a lot of people weren't raised by someone like my dad, because my children, we always, it was adults in the room that made decisions for children, and competent adults. And this is something that it's beyond me to understand.
I think there's two things here that I just want to point out real quickly. First of all, whenever they frame it around parental rights, then they're automatically just admitting that the parents are the ones who are making this decision. So all of that malarkey about, the child is deciding their gender, all of that's just absolute, junk. The second thing is that they have a section in here called factual allegations. And the first sentence of their factual allegations is, gender identity is an essential element of human identity and a well-established concept in medicine. A concept is not a fact, and a concept is not a thing that is established. Whenever you have something like concept art, then it's supposed to be a futuristic projection of what they're wanting to accomplish. And that's exactly what's going on here. The simple fact is that the transgender process that they're trying to put them into cannot provide them with all of the foundational truths and things that go along with being the opposite sex. They cannot provide them with the ability to produce children, whichever sex they're trying to switch them to. So in reality, the transgender process that they are creating is simply removing their sex from them.
Yes.
And then helping them to portray as if they're the other. The best that it can hope to achieve is to remove what is rightfully theirs by birth, given to them by God. Because they have a life and they have a body, this is theirs.
Right.
The best they can hope to do is not to switch it to something else, but to take what they have and replace it with just a little bit of extra, surgical accessories. I don't know how else to put that,
No, that's exactly right. And I think there's something else I was wanting to discuss with you in regard to some statements that I had made the other day about the fact that the American Psychiatric Association still holds to the fact that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition or a mental health disorder. I think that sometimes we have to be very careful when we put those types of statements out there. And the reason I say that is yes, it has always been recognized by most all organizations up until the last little while. But we also understand that there is a spiritual attack that is happening in the minds of our children as well. And we're not just crossing I believe that the mental health issue is the end result of the attack from Satan in confusion. Does that make sense? And what are your thoughts about that, David?
No, look, the reality that this is a spiritual battle is crystal clear. I think even, what we saw at the Capitol, the second to last day, the day that the bill was overawed, we published several things in our Kentucky Citizen publication that some folks are familiar with, and other publications talking about the spiritual reality was visible to see for those that were looking. And we saw similar battles, take place all across the nation. It's interesting. This makes me think of one of the first times I really heard this issue, the importance of engaging in this battle over the issue of transgenderism and the idea that you can, your gender identity is independent of your biological sex. I remember I was at kind of an economic conservative gathering that Dennis Prager was speaking at. If y'all are familiar with Dennis Prager.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And he was supposed to be talking about some fiscal issues, some fiscal policy issues, and he was in the middle of writing, he's Jewish, writing some of his, he put out a series of commentaries on the first 5 books of the Bible, I believe, and he was writing the one on Genesis. And he, mid-speech, just kind of did a little turn on the audience and started talking about the reality of the fact that as conservatives, we had to engage in this battle because the left was now directly attacking Genesis 1. The foundation of God's created order was under attack. And his point in that was that there's a lot of other important issues of the day, tax policy and others, and that is not to say that those issues are not important. But if we are not making a concerted effort to engage in the fundamental battle of our day, we're missing out on, and we're going to allow the other side to take ground. And really, we have seen that. And so it's my hope, laws and public policies are fundamentally important, but we all recognize that a lot of these laws and policies and decisions, they are downstream of culture and other forces.
Right.
And so it is, my hope, as we engage in these and have, conversations like we're having here today, we can equip and encourage the body of Christ to be thinking and engaging in these issues. And our churches talking about these issues. I mean, y'all probably recognize this even better than I do, but how many, youth pastors have I had conversations with that are talking about these issues are coming up in the church, in their congregations. And what are we doing as believers to equip our people, disciple our people to have a biblical worldview, so we train up our kids in our congregations to think biblically in these issues. So I just think that's fundamentally important. And I do think, like you said, we are seeing these public policy issues are really bringing to light the underlying spiritual battles that are happening on these important issues.
Well, the best economic policies that have ever been implemented or that we could implement still in a corrupt society makes the society unsustainable. So it doesn't matter, and it is important. We try to do good fiscal policy. We're going into a budget year, and we will try to implement good policy economically. But in a corrupt society, it doesn't matter. It will not sustain itself for a few reasons, but one is that it's against God, and God is going to see to it that it is not blessed. And we want God's blessing upon what we do, upon our daily lives, upon our state, upon our country. And the only way that God will bless it is if we do it the way that He says to do it. And I think that attack, that spiritual attack, and we felt it, we saw it, we experienced it. I think Representative Baker a couple times, and he probably expressed this to you as well, as he worked really hard on these policies that we dealt with that were in Senate Bill 150. And he said, I have never experienced an oppression like I have working on these issues, just a spiritual battle, spiritual war. And there are people, I get a lot of communication, and some of the people in that communication, they constantly want to go after the fact that you can't have God in government, separation of church and state. We're going to do something on that real soon. And a lot of our history has been erased from the minds of people, how it was actually founded on biblical principles with men that loved God and sought God. And so we're going to talk about that here in the near future. But to say that we are in a spiritual war is an understatement.
Yeah. And you talk about just the oppression, and I'm nobody. I'm just here talking with you on the podcast. nothing compared to what y'all have experienced. But just over the past week since, all that whole thing blew up with the video that YouTube took down, then even then, while I've been working, then it's just been like this drain on me thinking about we're not making a difference. Nothing's happening. Nobody's hearing what we've got to say. And all of this is just the oppression of Satan. That's why being not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you faint not.
Right.
And a lot of times then our ability to push through and to endure is affected by we've got our eyes in the wrong place, right? He says, while we look not on the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. The context of that is that we faint not, right? And it can be really easy whenever it seems like you're surrounded. It seems like you're overshadowed. There's nowhere to turn, and it doesn't seem like you're gaining any ground. Then that oppression just is suffocating almost, even for just a normal person going about their day. And can you imagine what it must be like for those parents that their child has come home and the school has socially transitioned them without them knowing it? They go to the psychiatrist's office, and the psychiatrist says, do you want a dead child or a trans child? And on top of that, the oppression that we know comes from that spiritual darkness that comes with it. They must feel as if they are suffocating under the weight of what they're going through.
Yes.
That's something that I can't ever get out of my mind, is what those parents are actually, and some of them I understand are they're in it for them. There are some though that are just, they're in the middle of it and they don't see any way out.
Right.
And what y'all have been trying to do, and what this legislation has done, and what the Family Foundation does, is try to show them there's a different way.
Yes.
There's a way out. There's a light, a place of light, not a place of oppression, but a place where their child can be whole again, not just treated to feel better for a little while, but they can be whole again. And this ACLU case is just fighting against all of that light. And it seems like they have all the power behind them. You know what I'm saying?
Well, revival will do what legislation can never do.
Yeah.
And that's really what we need, isn't it?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, look, we're as Christians, as followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, He's Lord over all areas of our lives, and that's
Amen.
one of
Amen.
The foundational parts of the mission of the Family Foundation is, look, we just want how we engage in the culture, how we engage in in public policy and in the issues of the day is a reflection and a way to give honor to the Lord Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And we're called as Christians not to buy into this this segmentation of our lives that says we should wall off our Christian beliefs from certain areas of our lives, or we've just got to be faithful to the calling that the Lord has given us. And the other thing I'll just share in encouragement for any pastors and other churches is, look, the weightiness of the decisions that are being made by our legislators, the issues that are being laid at the feet of our government officials saying, hey, there's a problem, fix this. Now, we can all probably recognize, our government's, I like to say sometimes our founders would be rolling over their graves in terms of the issues of the day that we think, need to be fixed from a governmental perspective. But this issue clearly is an issue of properly understanding the role the reason that God has created government. This fits directly in alignment with this. But I just bring that up to say that just forming a relationship, praying for your elected officials, seeking to connect with them, to encourage them, to pray for them, to hold them accountable when need be. It's so vitally important. I'm convinced more and more each day that God obviously has created His church, and He's got shepherds that He's placed in positions of authorities in church. But we need to remind ourselves as believers, as the church, that God has also created and ordained government. And He's the one that created it. He's laid out in His Word the general principles and purposes of it. And He has placed shepherds over His government, whether they recognize that or not. And what an opportunity we have to bring together the shepherds of God's church and the shepherds of his government, at least in relationship with one another, because so many of these issues that they're dealing with in Frankfurt, our pastors and churches are dealing with those issues at the local level. So when we can have synergy between those things and policies that honor the Lord, and then churches engaging and being the salt and light that we're called to be, that's one way in which the Lord has provided us to point people to his truth.
Absolutely. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring us into that discussion, was to point out what you just said. The prayers makes all the difference in the world when it comes to courage, when it comes to wisdom, all of those things. And also to point out, when I refer to the mental health disorders, I'm using that to point out their hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. But I also understand that we are dealing with spiritual issues and we are dealing with sin. Mm-hmm. And I know people don't like it when you call it out for what it is, but that is absolutely what it is. And God, in the beginning, God created male and female. Mm-hmm. That was it. There's nothing else that God has laid out for any other society that has ever existed. And so we have clear direction, we have foundational truth, and we have to constantly protect and stand on that foundational truth to make sure that our children and our grandchildren know the truth, and the truth is what makes them free.
Yes. And I'm sure you would agree with this, David, is that God created all things. We're told that without him was not anything made that was made. And then we're told in John 10 that the thief cometh not but for to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Mm-hmm. That all revolves around things that God created, not that he created, not that we created, because we haven't really created anything. We've manipulated things to create technology. All of those things are great in a lot of ways. But all of that purpose that he has is to attack, to kill, to steal, and to destroy those things that God created. And the first thing that he, created in relation to us is us.
Right.
He made them male and female. And all of these years, then he's attacked, the unborn, he's attacked the family, he's attacked the church. And it seems like we've given so much ground that finally he's able to assault that very first interaction between God and man, where he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's why this whole arena that we're dealing with, when you look at it from the perspective of reality, is death, destruction, and things stolen.
Right. Everything
that is theirs has been stolen from them. Their whole life ends up in shambles, and then eventually we see the rates of suicidality or whatever. It is the clear marks of satanic influence.
Yeah. And I know you have to go, David. We do appreciate your time. I kind of want to close out with this. You and I have had this discussion before a couple of times. And with everything that we just said, and I understand how some people are going to take it, but I have never in my life, I have never cussed anybody out. I've never threatened somebody's life. I've never threatened their wife. I've never threatened their children. I've never threatened their grandchildren. I've never sent somebody pornographic images. I've never done any of that. But that is exactly what has happened on our end when we take a stand on these issues. The people that claim to be tolerant do not tolerate anybody that doesn't think like them. And I'm sure that in an organization such as yours, being on a state level and a national level, that popular. You guys see this, and we don't get in public and constantly whine about, some bad email. But for somebody to take pornographic images and then put my wife's face on them and send them to me and tell me that to prepare to disappear or whatever that's supposed to mean, thinking that they're going to intimidate you, it's not intimidating, but you just scratch your head and say, well, y'all have been screaming tolerance for all this time. How can you be so intolerant?
Yeah.
No, we just said the nicest things said about us, so I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. But no, I appreciate you bringing that up. And you know, the reality is, and I'll just say this, look, you know, the other legislators, they take a lot more of the brunt of the hatred that we're seeing, and even the crossfire of the media and the big left media that, you know, was just, particularly during the session, it was just every day. We're still seeing it now, as with the lawsuit filed, every day,
Right.
this drumbeat of, you know, this narrative that they created, that somehow we're the aggressors in this battle, when we know that the reality is the exact opposite. But you know, I think there's an important thing that, Josh, I'm sure you would agree with, is and an encouragement to you know, legislators about standing bold on these issues. When you are known where your position is, and that you're just going to stand for truth, you know, and do what's right, regardless of what, you know, some media report may say, the arrows that come your way start being diverted somewhere else, because they know that you can't be moved.
Right.
My experience is that it's when you're kind of up in the air and the other side thinks that they might be able to win you over, that you really open yourself up to this kind of sustained threat. So I just bring that up to say, you know, an encouragement, not just for legislators, but for pastors and churches, you know, that addressing these issues always in a Christ-like manner, you know, recognizing that the heart of why we're having this conversation, the heart of why we you know, worked on this legislation, is because we love people. We recognize who God created people to be, and we, in the context of kids, we want to give kids an opportunity to be affirmed in the reality and the truth of who God created them to be, because we know that's how they will flourish. But standing firm in that brings an ability to, and a confidence that that I think we will continue to see the arrows kind of fall around the wayside. You know, the day that you talked about the 19 folks that were in the gallery in the house trying to cause chaos that day. Well, there was a lot more than 19 that were there earlier that day, and we know, you know, some of them were unfortunately bussed in from JCPS. But the reality was, the fact that the legislature moved very quickly that day to override that veto, I observed, you saw the numbers of those there start to dwindle.
That's right.
And so, I just bring that up as an encouragement to say, and I think you're a prime example of this, that when you stand boldly, it can be courageous to others to do the same.
Amen.
And I just bring that up to, one, is to point out the hypocrisy, but the other point of it is to make sure that the point is made that we're marching on.
Right.
We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep doing what is right. Mm-hmm. And it's literally, this is life and death, literally life and death. And so I can't think of anything more important than we can be doing as a society, is protecting our children and doing everything that we can to protect their minds, so that God can speak to their heart. And it's just key that we keep doing that. And we greatly appreciate all that you all do, and appreciate the open door that you have had for me. Not just that I've had an open door for you all, but you have for me, and you have resources that you have been able to let me have access to when it comes to legality and those types of things.
Not money.
With the connection. And so that's been great. And I appreciate I got accused this session, or after the session was over, I was told that the Family Foundation got to me, you know. And but being aligned on these principles and being able to band together and work together on that is key. And I believe it's been part of the success, is being able to band together as one and unify around these particular issues that are important for the family. So we greatly appreciate what you all do.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, I appreciate it. Great to be on and have this conversation.
Amen.
Amen. Well, we'll close out this particular podcast. We'll be coming to you later on this week with some more information. I am excited about talking about our history, and I have a friend of mine that's doing some research and going to join us for that. And so I'm excited to talk about where we came from so we can know where we're headed and sustain some of those things that God has blessed us with from the foundation and inception of this nation. Appreciate you joining. Share this, get it out, share the information. Go check out Rumble as well and subscribe there so that you can be notified on the things that are there, just in case YouTube decides that they don't want to put out what we're saying. But we do have an avenue we can get the truth out, so we'll continue to do that. Thank you, and God bless. Thank you for watching the Josh Calloway podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to get as much information out as we can about what is going on in our state, in our communities, and across the country. If you will like, share, subscribe to this podcast, you can be notified as soon as a new podcast comes out. Tell your friends, tell your family about it. We would love to have more people participating and more people informed about what is taking place. Thank you, and God bless.